Emisión.net.
Hello again and welcome to Letter from England, broadcasting for the Spanish Evangelical Alliance and AC Press. My name is Jonathan Dawson. Who really speaks for Roman Catholicism today in Spain? A century on the mountain of faith is how the Catholic Church likes to see itself, with its number 2 from the Vatican, Cardinal Tarcisio Bertone, giving his support for the Spanish bishops in all their disputes with the socialist government on a recent visit to Spain. In a lengthy discourse on human rights, Bertone, flanked by the chairman of the Spanish House of Bishops, Antonio Rocco, gave listening clerics and politicians his view of the strained relations between Madrid and the Spanish Catholic hierarchy. Among the more than 500 people in the audience were the Justice Minister, Mariano Fernández Bermejo, who had a front row seat. Well, the event was courteous. It began and ended with applause, the Lord's Prayer, and 3 Ave Marias. An Episcopal spokesman said afterwards with evident delight, "This is exactly what Rocco has been saying. Our fellowship with Rome is absolute." And he then left for lunch at the Vatican's embassy in Madrid with about 50 bishops. Well, Bertone, the Vatican Secretary of State, was officially paying a private visit to Spain, but still managed to pack in 2 days of intense diplomacy and speak to the King, the Prime Minister, the Deputy Prime Minister, and the Foreign Minister. Well, that's a pretty impressive private visit. The trip was undoubtedly a political coup for Rocco, and the bishops seemed in party mood following Bertone's speech. Never before had the prelates celebrated Human Rights Day with such gusto, as the Pope's next-in-command went through Catholic doctrine point by point, making it very clear that Rome backed the Spanish bishops to the hilt in their conflict with the Madrid government, at least in content, as we'll see. Bertone said, "When the Church speaks about human rights, it does not forget to base them on God. These rights are above politics and also above the state-church axis." And he managed to cover all the burning issues in Spanish society at present, including abortion, calling it a clear violation of creation order. While on genetics, he said, the new frontiers of bioethics do not mean a choice between science or morality, but highlight the need for science to have a moral framework. As for same-sex marriage, which the Catholic Church denounced 2 years ago as the most horrible thing that had happened in their history, Bertone said, "Family life is based on marriage between a man and a woman united by an indissoluble link." The citizenship subject was also hammered. Quote, "The right of parents to choose their children's education must be respected." And Bertone also had strong words for the secularist regime of Zapatero. Those who want to make faith strictly a private thing are advocating a caricature of religious faith, and is an attack on the rights of people who want to live out their religious convictions as they wish, or as their beliefs demand. This is not neutral secularism, but hostility towards any role for religion in politics or culture, especially towards all religious symbols in public institutions. Well, perhaps apart from that last phrase, most evangelicals would agree with much of what he's saying. The one thing that Bertone did seem satisfied with regarding relations with the Spanish government is perhaps the most scandalous for Protestants and genuine democracy, and it's the fact that Prime Minister Zapatero has guaranteed that the Vatican will continue to receive privileged treatment from the Spanish state, despite this being in flagrant contradiction of the Constitution and of the separation of state and church, at least at an official level. Now, Bertone said equality did not mean uniformity, saying the principle of equality is undermined if diverse situations are treated in the same way. Well, that kind of ambiguity, of course, can allow one group to be treated with more privileges than the other. Well, what of the government's response to all of this? Deputy Prime Minister de la Vega claimed relations with the Catholic Church are normal, but admitted that those with the Vatican differ from those with the Spanish Catholic House of Bishops. Quote, "because they're different." Yeah. Well, in other words, while the one retains diplomatic niceties, the other lets loose with the full force of its fury when in disagreement with the government. We're back to tone now. We said that they agreed on content before, but perhaps not in the presentation. De la Vega said she regrets that the government's respectful tone has not been reciprocated by the bishops. At a press conference during the visit of the Vatican No. 2 to Madrid, she said the visit proved that relations between Madrid and the Vatican were cordial. And she put her cards firmly on the table, though, when adding that churches are perfectly entitled to participate in democratic debate, but it's governments that pass laws. Well, she recognised that they do share common concerns on issues such as human rights, poverty and third world development. But the government No. 2 also acknowledged that there are points on which they disagree. Now, without spelling out those differences, and of course they're the issues which Bertone referred to and which we mentioned earlier, De la Vega said, "We've talked about all the issues. In some our disagreement is obvious, but in others there's room for dialogue and agreement." Well, that brings us finally to the relationship between Cardinal Rocco, the leading Catholic primate in Spain, and the Vatican. And it's a complex one. He is a personal friend of the current Pope, Joseph Ratzinger, with whom he studied in Munich. He speaks as if he were the undisputed leader of Catholicism in Spain. The Spanish Pope, as a newspaper dubbed him a few years ago. But this is a tendency which sets alarm bells ringing in the Roman administration. Catholicism is Roman by definition, and doesn't tolerate national churches. It clings to its own power and its own hold over Catholicism across the world and in every country, and has watched suspiciously ever since the English Church split in 1531 and a semi-autonomous French Church emerged under Louis XV in 1620. Now, Ratzinger himself, when at the head of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, that's the new name for the Inquisition, limited the powers of national episcopates in 1998 with regard to doctrinal pronouncements. The Vatican has no intention of letting its power slip. Hence, Bertone's visit to Madrid re-emphasizes the centralist view that the Vatican has the prime role in relations between the Catholic Church and national governments, in this case the Spanish government. Nothing was done to undermine Rocco himself, but the hierarchy remains clear. Is there a difference, then, in the way the Vatican talks to Madrid from the way Spanish bishops speak in their dealings with the government? Well, only in tone. The Vatican is equally concerned at Zapatero's liberal agenda and the influence this is having in Europe and Latin America. Yet there's a huge contradiction in the way the Spanish socialists deal with the Catholic Church. On the one hand, they're undermining what the Vatican sees as the spiritual reserves of Europe, but on the other have handed them one of the most general financial packages on the continent. Yet Rome prefers the diplomatic approach in its dealings with Madrid, rather than the frontal assault practiced by Rocco and company. Or is it that Rome can afford to prefer the diplomatic approach, because its frontline troops are Rocco and the other bishops, and are doing their dirty work for them? Well, last year the Pope asked the Spanish bishops to be a bit more intelligent and cordial when it came to speaking to the government, and that sentiment is echoed by most of the religious orders. So perhaps there is more than a difference in tone, also in the way in which the Vatican wants to speak to Madrid. Even Opus Dei supported a more moderate approach. Rocco listens, but then allows Cope Radio, owned by the House of Bishops, to attack the government with an aggression that has been rejected by most of his episcopal colleagues. It seems perhaps that he's biding his time to see which way the opposition Popular Party will turn. But for now, the leader of that party, Mariano Rajoy, won't even speak to Rocco. Thank you for listening to Letter from England, broadcasting at acpress.net.
Emisión.net